All right. It's a nice piano.
Miles, welcome to Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church.
Thank you, Gordon.
Welcome to James Bay United Church. You already commented on the piano. It's new to us.
Oh, okay.
So Tom Lee Music has supported Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church by offering us this piano for the next 6 months or so, and it's nice to see them supporting music.
Thank you, Tom Lee.
Thank you, Tom Lee.
Yeah. Grand. I lived around the corner. I kind of grew up around the corner from this church. It's my first time being in this church.
Really?
I mean, I literally lived right around the corner, and from the time I was 13 till I graduated high school. So this was my hood. It's great to be back.
We're going to get a chance to talk about that. I'm interested in why Sentimental Mood as your opening number.
One of the first jazz standards I learned when I was 13, studying with George. I think it was one of his favorites, and so I started to play it, and I often played it at, I think what's now called the Bent Mast, the restaurant. It was called Bo Richards back in those days, so I used to play a lot of solo piano gigs there as a teenager, and that was one of the tunes I used to try to play on their little upright.
George Essayhaus.
Essayhaus, yeah.
So he's a household name for anybody who's taken piano lessons in the last 50 years here in Victoria.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I have a lot of friends and a lot of acquaintances that studied with him, and loved him a lot.
When you and I were speaking a couple of days ago, you talked about learning all the standards in all 12 keys, and that's how you kind of proved yourself, honed yourself. Is that something that every piano player has to do, is be able to play those standards in all of those different keys? Is that how you master the instrument?
I think it helps. I got that tip from Mike Taylor, who was a wonderful African-American jazz pianist who was playing in Victoria and doing a workshop at Allison Pianos. And he said, at the workshop, he said, if you don't know a standard in all 12 keys, you just don't know it. And so I went home feeling sort of discouraged because I didn't know how to play any song in all 12 keys. And the first one I picked, I think, crazy now that I look at it, was Here's That Rainy Day, which, as you know, changes key every 2 beats practically. And I slogged that. It took me all week to get through all 12 keys. But what I found was that the song revealed its architecture to me as I learned it in another key. And it kind of revealed secrets about music and about the structure of harmony and about how melody relates to harmony in a way that I'd never even thought of before. And so consequently, when I would take a standard through the different keys, I also, as you know, the piano sounds different in different keys. Like I just played In a Sentimental Mood in D flat instead of the key of F major. And that to me has quite a different sonority to it. And it also feels different under the fingers, which is sort of fun too. So you play a song in a different key because of the architecture of the piano. I enjoy the way the songs feel in the keys, other keys than the regular keys. Now, another useful aspect of learning a song in other keys is that if you're playing with singers, they often just start singing and they'll say, "Yeah, all of me," and you just have to find that note and hope that you know it in that key, because sometimes singers, you have to accommodate their voice, right? And so it's really useful to be able to transpose on the fly, or at least spend some time learning about how to play that song in other keys.
This is the working musician's toolkit.
I think so, and my ambition as a teenager was to become as good a jazz piano player as I could be. Because I was living in this Victoria, which at the time was, and I think in some ways still is, but at the time was considered a small town. And my ambition, of course, was to move to New York City or something silly like that and try to make it with the big guns. And I thought, oh, Miles, you're going to get crushed. You're going to move to Vancouver and they're just going to squish you like a bug. You'll never make it. So in many ways, I think I might have over-prepared. But I think that might be a characteristic of many people from the island, that they worked really a little extra hard to prove their mettle when they got out.
So you've picked another standard as your next song. You've picked Sunny. And what I find interesting about the choice is that structurally and harmonically, it's fairly simple and straightforward. And I think our audience is going to be pretty fascinated to see where you go with it.
Well, I picked Sunny because I want to talk a little bit about, or just get the audience to understand that for me, I love the feeling of music. And so it's more about instead of all the complex harmonies, which of course I love, there's something about just getting into a really great groove, which to me, I can just do that. I mean, honestly, I could just play the first chord of Sunny and it feels so good. And I get into that, just like I get into just banging on a hand drum sometimes along with a Stevie Wonder record. So it's not always for me about like flashy riffs, and I just love groove. Love it.
Let's hear this groove. Sunny. Miles.
Yeah.
A namesake.
Yeah.
So your dad's a musician, and he called you Miles.
Well, my father played. He was an amateur. He tried to write songs. He played the guitar, and he liked poetry, and played several instruments as a teenager. And I'm, because he was born in '46, so his by the mid '60s, he like many others loved the like the Dave Brubeck album Time Out. I think he was a big fan of that album, and a big fan of Stan Getz, and a big fan of Miles Davis. And so he named me after.
And from the middle of the island, you were born in Port Alberni?
Yes.
So tons of great music over the last 4 decades coming out of the middle of Vancouver Island. What is it about that?
I don't know what that is, although, as I referred to before, there's that sense that you're from a small town and that you need to be prepared for the big smoke when you cross the water. So I was thinking about John Lee, because there's a young guy from the middle of the island who's exceptional on 4 different instruments. Like, he's risen so high, but he comes from such a very small town. And then there's Phil Dwyer and Christine and Ingrid Jensen and Diana Krall, and then there's people here in Victoria. I think they're from Up Island as well, like Brent, and I don't know what it is. I think, as we had spoken about on a previous conversation, that maybe, at least for me, just sort of the overwhelming beauty and majesty of the nature that surrounds us has to have an effect. When you're standing looking at the ocean and the mountain ranges and the trees and the smells of the sea, all of that has to come into play somehow at the development of a musician or an artist of any kind, I'd say.
And when you moved to Toronto, you felt like you lost some of that.
I sure missed it. When I was in Toronto, I definitely felt lost. I felt lost in the largeness of the city. And one good thing came out of that experience in that I took a break from music, because when I went to Toronto, I went with the intention of going to music school. I didn't last. And I was practicing so much. At one point, I remember I was practicing so hard, I fell asleep on the piano, and I woke up and the keys were covered in blood because I'd practiced till my fingers were bleeding. And then I had a keyboard imprint on my forehead because I fell asleep like this. And I remember thinking, oh, Miles, you're going too far. This is insane. You're practicing so much that, you're probably going to keel over. And also I ran out of funds, and so I ended up getting a day job and just working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I sold my instruments. And I took a little time to discover who I was outside of music, because my ego, which was very frail at the time, I think was so wrapped up as being a musician. And
you were already a professional performing musician at like 16 years old here in Victoria.
At 14, I'd been playing professionally here. So by the time I got to Toronto, I'd had 5 years of professional music making.
Steady gig at Pags?
Steady gig at Pagliacci's, thank you, Howie, every Monday night. And also all over Victoria and up and down the island, playing in various bands. So it was really good to take, I don't know how long, 5 to 6 months off, and just find out who I was apart from music. Because I think when you're young, you self-identify with what you do, what you accomplish, and what you're good at. And you think, oh, that's who I am. What I found out by quitting music for a while was, that's not who I am. I'm okay. I can stand on my own 2 feet, irregardless of whether I have an instrument. And I don't need that to be validated as a human being, that I'm okay. Also, what I found is I can make a living. So I ended up working at the Red Cross for a while. I worked at Manulife Insurance, and I just had these jobs. And then when I finally had enough money in the bank account to get out of Toronto and come back to Victoria, I re-emerged, sort of like a chrysalis. I felt refreshed, and I felt like getting back into music full force. And it was a beautiful feeling to get back into it at that time, because I was doing it more from a different angle, not out of the desperation of having to prove myself, but just, I love doing this, I love playing music. It just brought me so much joy. And so my impetus was different at that point.
Was Humber a little cookie cutter?
Well, I would say all institutions have a mandate to because they're dealing with large numbers of people, so they have to put them through a sort of an homogenized program. It's, you don't really have the option of customizing the programs per student as much. And even when I taught at Cap College, I had a hard time because I had students of all different backgrounds and abilities and some neuroses and things that you have to deal with. And you realize, oh, you know, this program that you signed up for, I remember thinking, this is going to be really hard to fit you through this, you know, to play all these scales and all 12 keys and all these hard chords and have to play in front of a jury when I can tell you're terrified. And so it's not for everybody, and it certainly wasn't for me. So I felt pretty hypocritical at that time, teaching at a college for 5 years and having to push all these people through this cookie cutter system. And certainly at Humber College, I didn't last at all because I didn't feel like that was the place for me at that time. And not to say that I couldn't have gotten a lot out of it had I had the proper funds to keep me there and had more stability in my life, but it just wasn't for me at the time.
So at a certain point in time, you start to write your own music, and I'm wondering for the artist, where's that moment where you stop doing standards and you start writing, because you're going to perform a piece for us called Lyle.
Oh, yeah. Well, when I got a fake book back when I was 13, you know, they were hard to find, by the way, back then, you may recall. I got a fake book, and I looked through this fake book, because that's how I was playing my tunes, by playing through a fake book, right? And I looked at them and I went, can I do this? So I got some manuscript, and every day I would try to write 5 or 6 pieces of music and make it look like fake book charts. And I tried playing with my friends, and they were not. Sometimes there were a couple bars that were kind of good, but usually, and I still have them, by the way, but generally speaking, these compositions they didn't really stand up, obviously, because I'm not playing many of them today. But it was a good process to just be away from a piano, just sit, and usually during math and science class, I'd be sitting there with my paper composing, and by the end of math, I'd have 5 or 6 32-bar tunes or blues or whatever written. And then I was excited to play them with my pals. And so that process of writing started at 13, and it continues to this day. But now often I'm inspired. When Lyle Mays passed away, the great pianist who was with Pat Metheny for many years, was a big influence on me. I just felt really compelled to write something for him, something beautiful. And as with all my favorite tunes, it came out in under a minute. I just went and then sat down and memorized it, because it was the songs that come to me the easiest are the ones I end up memorizing the most, and they tend to be the ones I play. The ones that I labor over, I don't usually look at too much. This next composition I wrote for my daughter, Jessica. And her name sounds like a melody to me. Jessica, Jessica. So there's no lyrics yet. A friend of mine, Linda Walker, the Vancouver Island jazz singer, is currently trying to write lyrics for it, but here it is, Jessica.
You went to high school here in Victoria.
Yep.
And there must be high school teachers that had some musical influence on you. And you've already mentioned George Essayhaus and Richard Byrd.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do these teachers influence the young budding musician who can't get enough?
Well, I can't say enough about those two gentlemen because at 13, I was just beginning to break out of classical piano because I was so interested in other musics that I'd heard all my life from my father's great music collection. And so I was starting to investigate, people like Billy Joel and Elton John and people who sang and played. And I thought, wow, well, that's very interesting. Burton Cummings, Joni Mitchell, anybody who played piano and sang, I thought, what are they doing? Cat Stevens even. And I thought, how can I do that? So I thought, well, I'm going to try to learn to sing and play at the same time. So I tried to learn as many songs as I could at 13, singing. And they weren't all pop tunes, just whatever I could learn. And so I was starting to learn piano differently. I was starting to think about chord symbols, you know, and looking at sheet music and going, what are chord symbols? I was starting to figure out music theory. And then my science teacher came to me one day, in grade 8, and he said, Miles, I know you love piano. Bill Darling, his name was, at Central High School. Thank you, Bill, if you're listening. And he gave me a cassette, and he said, Miles, you've got to check this out. This is Keith Jarrett, recording in Germany, solo piano. It's hours of him improvising. And I went, what do you mean, improvising? And he said, well, he's just making up music for hours in front of an audience. And I thought, oh, now that was a pivotal moment in my life, that cassette tape, because I went home, and I listened, and I kind of remember putting all my classical music books at the bottom of the bench and thinking, okay, I'm going to try this. And that was the very, very beginning. So thank you for a great science teacher who had the foresight to help me out that way. And then right around that time, I went and saw George, who wasn't really accepting piano players at my level. I was only at grade 5 conservatory, so I wasn't very advanced pianistically, but I was hungry for it. And so he opened up this massive vista. As anybody who knows George can attest to what a marvelous man he was in terms of an educator, how much he shared his enthusiasm for creating beauty on the piano. I'd never met anybody who made such a beautiful sound on a piano before. I couldn't believe it. I was just so astonished to hear anybody play piano with that much integrity and beauty and sonic purity and clarity and everything about his piano playing was just stunning to me. And he was just getting into jazz. He had only been involved with jazz piano at that point for 4 years, I think. So he was in some ways a fledgling discoverer. He was in that discovery mode. He was very excited about jazz. And so we spent a lot of time just free improvising, which again opened up big worlds for me. Then when I went and saw Rick Bird, he came at teaching me from a different angle, filling in the gaps from what perhaps you might say almost a mathematical level ideas, where he would teach me voicings using numeric coding, in a sense, and teach me jazz modes. And so he was filling in one side of the equation while George was helping fill in another. And I was somehow just kind of putting it all together and adding whatever I could learn on my own. And then also by grade 11, I had the great fortune of having Tom White at Spectrum, and he played trumpet, flute, and bass, electric bass at a really high level. And he actually played in my quartet, which is great. Thank you, Tom. That was really fantastic. And he had a great taste in music, and he really encouraged me to move forward. And then in grade 12 at Mount Doug, I had Len Michaud, who was an amazing jazz upright bass player, and he was very encouraging and would perform with me as well. And so I was very blessed, basically, to have these people in my life that were always helping me and pushing me. And then there was a wonderful alto sax player in town named Brian Longworth, who was kind of a mentor for me because he really kicked my butt. But he let me play in his quartet. At 17, I was playing in his quartet, and the music was really challenging. And his compositions were brilliant, and but he encouraged me to mature, to raise the level of my playing to a higher level. And so we would just sit in his cabin out in the woods and listen to jazz music, and we would listen, and then we would talk about it, and we would analyze it, and he would describe to me what Herbie Hancock's doing or what Tommy Flanagan, how it fits in the big picture. He would explain to me aspects of jazz improvisation that I didn't know about. Motific development was a big one. So allowing a motif to develop more and more so that the music has a kind of a structure as I'm improvising. Wow. You know, so there were so many people in my life that I have gratitude towards. And I have to mention Louise Rose. Your interview with her is so fabulous, and I hope everybody watches that interview, because everyone can get something out of it, irregardless of whether they're a musician. That concept of perfect imperfection applies to all of us, mere mortals, and so thank you, Louise, for that. And I don't know if I told you this, but Louise's house at that time was across the street from George's place where I took lessons on Birdhead. So I would cross the street after my lessons and hide under her window and listen to her practice.
Does Louise know that?
Louise knows now because I told her. I was the stalker of Louise Rose at 13 or 14 or 15. I was the kid hiding under her window listening to her practice. And any time I could hear her live, I would sneak off to hear her play anywhere I could. So I was haunting her. And also Jerry Bryant was a fellow who's still in town. I think he's in his 90s now, a jazz pianist. And so
this speaks to the hunger. And then you're a professional musician here in Victoria, and then you have the short stint in Toronto.
Very short.
You come back to Victoria, and you're one of the most working musicians again at this young age.
Yeah.
And then the big challenge to go to Vancouver, and lots of different styles of music in Vancouver. I mean, Anne Mortifee. I mean, that's a completely that's a different direction in the 80s.
It was, although it wasn't 100% foreign to what I'd been engaged in, because in Victoria I'd been playing with rhythm and blues bands at that time, and I'd been playing with folk singers-songwriters and folk singers, and all types of artists in this city hired me. I even did musical theater here. So there were so many types of music that I'd been exposed to. Plus I was doing music therapy here, which actually had a big impact on me as a human being, with Mari Sherlock, and I was doing children's entertaining as well, like playing for little kids and clowning around that way, and playing at folk festivals. And so I was playing other instruments at that time too. So all of this stuff contributed to my awareness of how to engage in other styles. And when I went to Vancouver, I was actually conscripted to join Anne's band, thanks to Bill Sample. He recommended me. And Anne's manager came in 1987 and said, "Hey, Miles, how would you like to join Anne Mortifee's band in Vancouver?" And this for me was like, I just turned 21 and I was like, what? Yes, thank you. So I moved to Vancouver right away, and I was playing with some of the top musicians in Vancouver immediately. Then shortly after that, I joined Wild Root Orchestra, which was all of the top musicians in Vancouver, and then Paul Horn's band, and then Skywalk. So how lucky can a guy get, really? It's crazy. So I was playing with so many wonderful groups right off the bat. And I didn't have to do what I think a lot of people do when you move to a big city, which is try to establish yourself slowly, by knocking on doors. I was in right off the bat.
And you feel grateful for that?
Oh, I'm so grateful. I mean, it could have gone many other ways, right? And I could have maybe nobody would have ever heard of me, and I'd still be in Victoria, which would have been fine, right? I love Victoria, by the way. I miss it, especially James Bay.
You're going to play Skylark for us.
Yeah.
I love this piece.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you why I'm going to play it, Gord, just before I do.
No,
when I was rifling through a piano bench at my mother-in-law's house on Niagara Street years ago in 1987, I found, I think it was like the original sheet music from Skylark, like when it was, printed out and published. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it and went, what is the Skylark? I had not played it yet. Hoagie Carmichael I knew about, and I loved him because he wrote Georgia on My Mind, which was the first tune I ever learned. But Skylark, I thought, this is a sumptuous piece of music. So, I'd love to play that for you now. This next piece is called Very Early, written by the great Bill Evans. And I hear it's one of the first tunes he wrote when he was in college in Louisiana. And it's also one of the first jazz tunes that George S. E. Haas exposed me to when I was just starting to learn jazz piano. It's actually a really hard tune, but at that time he didn't tell me that. He just said, "Oh, this is a lovely song. You'll probably really enjoy playing this." So I'll do my best to play Very Early now.
So Tuesday Night Jazz at the church.
Yeah.
Where, this thing has been going on for close to 2 years now, and we pretty much every single Tuesday night had different artists in here, and probably had 100 people in the room. It's a totally different thing since mid-March, as everybody's experiencing. But there's been a kind of a rally around Tuesday Night Jazz at the church, where the congregation still wants to support this arts ministry, and there's people stepping up from the community. So you've got Robert Detling's been here today managing the cameras. Kelby McNair has done the sound with us, and he's one of our regular hosts. Joseph Owens is a expert videographer and has been doing the colorist work for us in the background. And then there's this community following, both here in person when they can be and online. And I want you to know that when we heard that you were coming to do this, that everybody was thrilled and excited. So we know there's going to be a lot of people paying attention to this kind of personal time that we're having together. It feels odd in this empty room, but I want you to know that you're being embraced by a whole lot of people.
Well, that's very sweet. Yeah, thank you.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you want to say before we listen to your last song?
Well, you know, as a musician living in a time when everything's getting shut down, it's so interesting to see how things are opening up in different ways. And so, speaking personally, I really appreciate how people seem to need or want music in their life and arts in general, and that they keep reaching out and keep supporting artists. Because honestly, this could have been the most devastating time for all musicians and artists in general, people in the arts. You know, from my heart anyway, I really appreciate all the support for all my compatriots out there struggling in the world of arts in general. It's so wonderful how those, like a show like this, it's opening a window and letting people know that artists are still working at their craft and still, you know, struggling in our own way to stay relevant and grow. And this allows us this gives us sort of a purpose in a way. Because if we thought that perhaps we would never perform again, I'm not quite sure what would happen to jazz as an art form. It's already, jazz, as you know, is sort of a frail art form anyway. It doesn't have a lot of legs to stand on, certainly not financial legs, and it really relies on people's interest and love and support. So I just really appreciate all of this sort of thing. I've done a few shows like this already in various churches on the mainland, and I don't know exactly how many people are watching, but as you say, you think people are watching these programs and have a hunger for it and still love to know that there's music out there. Yeah, that's great.
Secret Love.
Yeah, secret.
This is a great way to end. Another beautiful melody and some great lyrics associated with it. What do you want to say about Secret Love before you play?
When I was a teenager living here in Victoria, I know I keep hearkening back. I was living in this neighborhood. A good friend of mine, Gene Hardy, this great sax player, violinist, who we grew up playing together, gave me a record of Oscar Peterson Trio, playing Secret Love. And when I mean playing, I mean it was so swinging. I just couldn't believe it. It was so effusive and so full of wonderful energy. So I can't play like Oscar, but I'm going to just try to get some of that lovely feeling happening, because I think that feeling in jazz is what makes people just happy. And that song's got a happy feeling to it. So if I can convey that, that's my aim.
Miles, this has been a real honor.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks to all of you for inviting me.